Welcome, whiskey people, to episode number 4 of the Whiskey Talkin podcast. This is a really fun special episode. I sat down with Brown-Forman Whiskey Specialist Mike Doyle to chat all things Old Forester Bourbon. Absolute blast trying all these whiskeys in a lineup. We sampled 9 bourbons, chat about each one, while learning about Mike in the process. So without further ado, let's get into it.
The Whiskey Talkin podcast.
All right, welcome everybody to the Whiskey Talkin podcast. We got a special one for you. We are joined by Mike Doyle. He's Brown-Forman Whiskey Specialist with Breakthrough Beverage in Las Vegas. So welcome, man.
Thanks, buddy. Welcome.
Yeah, this is fun. So we're we went from Shane's Whiskey Library a couple episodes ago to a undisclosed location with a lot of whiskey. So this is going to be fun, man. So tell everyone kind of what your position is and kind of your road to where you got to here.
Yeah, so I've been with Breakthrough for almost 2 years now. Started out as a beverage development specialist with Mr. Andrew Pollard. Then back in April, I took this brand new role for the state of Nevada. It's basically an account development specialist, but focused on the whiskeys, the Brown-Forman whiskeys. Up until a couple months ago, we only had American or North American whiskeys. We just added a few different Scotch distilleries to that list. So
awesome.
I'm trying to wrap my head around those right now. They're amazing. They've been around for a long time, but
yeah.
First I've really been exposed to it. But so pretty much my world is centered in on Old Forester, Jack Daniels, and Woodford Reserve.
It's not a bad lineup.
It's not a bad lineup. When I first read the job description, I kind of looked around and was like, it almost felt like they wrote that job description for me.
Right.
And when I went in for the interview, I basically told them, I said, this is my job. It's been a great opportunity. Basically, I get to do whiskey trainings for bartending staffs and operation staffs up and down the strip, and in the rest of throughout the rest of the valley. I do cocktail and menu development, and then execute special events, and then kind of throw in some whiskey dinners that we've just started getting rolling a few months ago.
Awesome,
that's been
man.
Pretty interesting.
Cool, awesome. Like real quickly, what's your background and kind of what led you to Las Vegas and kind of the road here?
I've been bartending since '96, so I've been doing it for a long time. I went to the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, graduated from there, and was bartending. Sold some real estate as well, but then really when the market crashed, kind of sunk my teeth back into the bar world. Was thinking about making a move to the West Coast at that time, and then kind of tragically, my mom passed away suddenly. She had a brain aneurysm, and so instead of moving to California, I picked everything up and moved to Vegas exactly 6 months later. Gonna be closer to my pops. We're super close.
Awesome.
So it's been really cool. Was in Vegas for about a year before I landed at the Cosmopolitan, and was fortunate enough to land down at. Actually, I got hired as an on-call bartender.
Okay.
And I was meant to work, pick up shifts, or get called in for any bar throughout the Cosmopolitan. A gentleman who hired me, a guy named Andrew Burgoyne, we call him Sweet Andy.
Okay.
And he said, well, I'm going to stick you at Vesper Bar, and you're going to learn from this guy named Andrew Pollard, because if you can pick up his cocktail program, you can go work at any of the other bars, because his is the most complex. And I was
Sure.
like, great. So ended up at Vesper Bar. Like I said, as an on-call, I trained there, sunk my teeth into that program. It was amazing. Those guys that worked there, I mean, I called it Murderer's Row, but Chris Hopkins, George Sproul, Roger Gillespie.
Kristen
was at Bond Bar.
Okay. Oh, but at Vesper in particular. Yeah. That bred some like amazing bartenders.
Oh,
and
100%.
Went on to do a lot of things too. So.
Yeah, so it's been pretty cool. And then I went from there, worked at Vesper for about a year. Then I went to the Pool District, spent 2 summers working out at the Cosmopolitan Pool, both the Boulevard and Bamboo Pool. Those were 2 amazing summers. I know you've worked at pools before.
I have.
It's a lot of fun.
Done that. Yeah, it's
great hours, good money.
Yeah,
it was a good time. And then I opened up Rose Rabbit Lie with a gentleman by the name of Marshall Altier. A good friend of mine worked there for about a year, and then Marshall left Rose Rabbit Lie to kind of work on his little baby project, which was a company called Road Soda, where they basically took a 1967 Airstream and fabricated it to be a cocktail bar, really, really high-end cocktail bar. What we did there was we put all of our cocktails into corny kegs and then pushed them out via an onboard draft system. And so we're producing cocktail parties for thousands and thousands of people in VIP and
festivals too, right?
It was all music festivals.
Yeah,
so in 16 months, I did 52,000 miles over the road. It was awesome. Yeah. I love that part. I love traveling.
Sure.
I love being on the road. I felt like a badass. I'm sitting there driving a chrome-wrapped Mercedes-Benz Sprinter van, dragging a 1967 Airstream that turns into a bar. It was awesome. Dude. Yeah.
It's awesome. So that's where you perfected like the art of, the batch cocktails draft system. Like you're dialed in there. Now you're seeing it a little more in bars, but at the time when you were doing it, not many places were really catching on yet. So
yeah, it was great. I mean, it's one of those things. I'm a big believer in everything happens for a reason, and you work a certain job for a certain amount of time, and that skill set and that experience that you learn there, that helps you build onto your next job.
Sure.
And everything is led up to kind of where I'm at right now.
Absolutely. I dig it. Nice. You said you're from Arkansas, nature state. So
the natural state.
Is it natural?
It's the natural state.
Wow. My research is already shit. So sorry. No, it's not. But
well, wait till you hear the stuff I tell you about these whiskeys.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I want to ask you a few things about it.
Shoot.
Do you have anything camouflage in your wardrobe?
Absolutely.
Okay. I figured. I'm just making sure you're still allowed to go back and visit. So I'm actually doing reconnaissance for.
I actually have a pair of overall bibs that I've had since I was 15 years old.
Done. Good.
They're the most comfortable thing I've ever. They're so soft.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Do you say y'all and reckon? I'm sure.
I don't say reckon, but I say y'all, and I also use it in my correspondence.
And if something's crooked, not sitting level, it's what?
I say crooked.
Okay, you wouldn't say cattywampus?
Oh no.
No, that's something different.
I kind of I know.
We
I'm
said that in
with,
South Dakota too, so that might have. I know it's far away, but we use
it's how there's always kind of little differences. I would say kittywampus, but not cattywampus. But
kittywampus.
So
all right, I got you. Better in Arkansas, fish or barbecue?
You mean catching fish?
No, just like as far as cuisine goes. If someone goes there,
I mean the fried catfish in Arkansas is amazing. I'm a little biased. My dad is an amazing barbecue smoker. I've grown up on that. I'm super particular about my barbecue.
Yeah.
So
what's the style there compared to?
It's kind of a blend between Texas barbecue and like Kansas City style.
Okay.
So, sweeter sauces, but it's all about the smoke. The smoke and the rub.
Absolutely.
As far as I'm concerned, if I go have barbecue and they put sauce on that,
right,
I'm a little upset.
Yeah, me too.
Barbecue sauce is for the French fries and the tater tots.
I got you. I love that. It's for the, and not to start this whole podcast on food related things. I might be just hungry.
Yeah.
But what the fuck is chocolate gravy?
I have no idea.
Really?
Yeah.
So that's beyond you.
It's beyond me.
Like when I search for things that people from Arkansas would know, I guess chocolate gravy. Yeah, man. I don't know. Maybe I just made it up. It was a dream.
I've heard of it. I'm just not familiar with it.
I might have just wrote it down, but all right, let's get into whiskeys, man. So, I mean, man, we're going to cover a lot here. So basically we took the Old Forester line and we're going to break it apart, say, tell a little bit of history and kind of go down the line all the way from, the 86, the staple, all the way up into some birthday bourbon special releases, right? So
I can't wait for that. Let's hurry.
I'm excited, man. So kind of give a brief history of Old Forester as a company.
Old Forester. 147 years old. It's America's first bottled bourbon. They were obviously making bourbon before that.
Right.
But back in the late 1860s, there was a lot of soldiers coming back from the Civil War with super gruesome, morbid injuries. They didn't have the painkillers that we have these days. So doctors were prescribing bourbon whiskey. And at the time, you would just take your jug up to a pharmacist who had a big barrel of whiskey or whatever, and he'd just kind of pull you off some. And it just wasn't a very consistent product. There were people putting turpentine in there, tobacco spit, dirty water, anything. When we talk about, I like that brown water, it really was just brown water.
Right.
And there was a gentleman by the name of George Garvin Brown, who was a pharmaceutical salesman, and one of his clients was like, "Hey, how come nobody like puts this in a bottle?" They had just kind of perfected bottle manufacturing to where you could make bottles, replicate bottles in mass. He said, that's a good idea. So he sourced whiskey from 3 different distilleries in Louisville, blended it together, make a consistent product, which, nowadays we're super familiar with. The more batches you can put into a blend makes it consistent. And then he put it in a glass bottle, sealed it, signed it, and guaranteed its authenticity and its quality to his customers. George Garvin Brown went on to form the corporation Brown-Forman.
Right.
And obviously it's still held by that company today. So a lot of really, really cool history there. You go to Louisville, and people in Louisville, they love Old Forester. I think bartenders really get behind that story of Old Forester.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, it's there's a lot of transparency with the brand. It's also delicious. And we're gonna go through some of the creations from Mr. Chris Morris here in a little bit, but it's a great brand. Can't wait to drink some.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of those where I wanted to do it for the podcast and early on, because I think it's extremely underrated, and it's starting to catch on a lot more. Obviously, with whiskey kind of geeks and people seeking, special bottles, birthday bourbon's always there. But I think there's a lot to learn from, the whole line, and we'll get into it later, but the Whiskey Row series is amazing too. So, so let's get into it and start with the 86.
Right on. So we refer to this as Old Forester Classic. It's going to be 86 proof.
We'll do it. Cheers.
Cheers.
It's a good one. All right.
So for the longest time, we've had, I think actually since the 70s, Old Forester has offered 2 different proofs, 86 and 100 proof. The 86 is considered the classic. The 100 proof is considered the signature. A lot of times people just think that the 100 proof is just a beefed up, less diluted version of the 86, and it's not. It's actually blended differently. They
handpick the barrels.
Sure. To blend it together. So it's a very distinct product. But the 86 is what I call kind of our base model.
Sure.
You're going to go into Total Wine and find a liter for $20,
yeah,
and that's incredible.
Solid, man. This is created in 1870, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's delicious, man. It's a good. It's definitely a good start. Just speaking of the name. Is it true that the name originally had 2 R's, and then or is that kind of like a folklore thing where it was named after a doctor and they had to take?
No, there are advertisements that have
with the 2 R's.
With the 2 R's.
Okay.
So, if you go to the Brown-Forman campus in Louisville, they've got this room set up, and that room will actually get moved over to the new distillery once it opens up in 2018 on Whiskey Row.
Yeah, can't wait for that.
Yeah, I can't wait. Spring is, I'm saying 2018 now. So. Right. But it's got an amazing kind of timeline of their history, along with some really cool things that they found in the archives. So there is definitely advertisements with the 2 R's in there.
Okay. Yeah, I was just like, it's one of those things where you always hear these stories and you're like, is that so? Going to the source and really asking for some clarity. But just speaking of the new, I know we'll get into the whiskey here too, but the new whiskey experience on Whiskey Row that's going in for Old Forester, is that going to have a distillery, or is it just a tourist element?
No, it's going to be a distillery.
Distillery also.
They actually just dropped in the Vendome 100-foot still.
Nice.
A couple months ago.
Cool.
There was a big thing on Facebook, and it was pretty rad. I mean, that place, you can't walk into it. Was in Louisville beginning of November. We had dinner at Docks, I think, right next door.
Okay.
And yeah, it's a full-on construction zone. So,
perfect.
But they just dropped that. So they'll be distilling spirit there and aging it. They will also be doing it at the Brown-Forman Distillery, which is technically in Louisville, but it's in a place called Shively, which it used to be out right on the outskirts, but now it's kind of been annexed into the city limits proper. But
maybe the most beautiful distillery campus that I've ever been to.
It's phenomenal. You get goosebumps when you drive by it. It's a special place, man.
Absolutely. The barrels rolling, there's a few distilleries down there where I would definitely recommend, but definitely check out Woodford, just because.
Oh, you mean awesome. Old Forester?
Old Forester.
Well, and check out Woodford too.
Yeah, both. All of them.
Sorry.
Same trip.
I'm in trouble now.
That's right. Let's get Yeah, let's get into the 100 proof, and we can talk a little bit more on that too.
Yeah, so this is a different blend altogether. The one thing that what I think separates Old Forester and Woodford Reserve and a couple other distilleries that are doing this is our warehouses are heat cycled. Right. That means it's not your traditional rick house that's just stick built and no discernible, like there's a wood floor in between each floor, but it's just open to the air, right? And it goes through the same seasons that you would find, spring, summer, fall, and winter.
Sure. At
Old Forester, actually at the Brown-Forman Distillery. At Brown-Forman Distillery, we distill Old Forester, Early Times, and Cooper's Craft. And in our warehouses there, they are what we call heat cycled, which means that they are concrete floors that separate each floor and that are heated. We do that also at Woodford Reserve, and I know Michter's does that as well.
Okay.
What that does is as soon as the temperature starts dropping in the fall, we let that temperature drop to a certain temperature, and then we crank the heat up. And then we actually put these thermometer probes into different barrels and different rick houses, and then once it hits the internal temperature, hits a certain temp, I think it's around 80 degrees, we turn the heat off.
Okay.
And then we open up the side doors, let that cold air come in, and it cools it back down. So what we're doing is we're forcing that whiskey in and out of the barrel more frequently than you would find with a traditional stick-built rickhouse.
Sure. So you're getting more extraction, but you're still getting different characteristics for different barrels in different warehouses at different levels, correct? Because
technically, no, and we'll get into that when we talk about the Statesman.
Okay.
So because theoretically, it's the same temperature on each floor because it's temperature controlled.
Okay.
Now, maybe in the summertime, you're going to get a little bit more. It's going to get hotter up top, but it's not like a regular rick house where it's that those top floors are about 150 degrees.
Okay.
But this is going to be bottled at 100 proof. When we released the one we'll taste in a moment, the 1897, the bottled at bond, people say, well, what's the difference? I said, well, it's 100 proof. Or the Old Forester Signature is 100 proof, but it is not bottled in bond. So we are using whiskeys from different production years, which is not allowed for a bottled in bond whiskey.
Sure.
But this is one of my absolute favorite go-to. I call them my utility whiskeys.
Yeah.
If I'm just looking to have something really nice and also available, you can find this almost anywhere.
Right.
This is amazing. Super brown sugar, dark caramel.
It's delicious. A little more. I mean, obviously, the proof's up there, but it's more bold. Mm-hmm. But you can tell it's still really solid. So as far as talking a little bit on cocktails, this would go great, hold up in some strong cocktails too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I like the 86 got a little bit of higher proof on it. Gives it a little bit more backbone. But I would consider that 86 proof kind of your premium well bourbon.
Sure.
The Signature is definitely like you can kind of get a little adventurous with that one. In fact, I've used it a lot with cocktails that I'm going to beat up a little bit, or add a bunch of different flavors to it. I still need that bourbon background
to shine through, and you definitely need a strong bourbon to do that. What was the first whiskey that you can remember? Going back before we get onto the rest of the line, I'm going to interject with some whiskey questions. Like growing up, what's the one that stood out? Like
tasting or knowing about?
Just experience. Like when you think the first whiskey that I can remember, like, oh, that's whiskey. It could be anything. But.
So, I mean, I grew up basically, my mom was a beer drinker. My dad was a vodka drinker.
Okay.
But my mom's sister, my aunt, who I love to death, super close with her, was a Jack Daniels drinker. She drank it Jack Neat. So that's awesome. And I remember she would come visit for Christmas, and my pops, trying to be cool, I remember when Gentleman Jack came out, he got her a bottle of Gentleman Jack, and she said, "That's nice, Jim, but it's not Jack." Yeah. And then when they released the single barrel, Jack Daniel's single barrel, same thing. And she's like, "That's nice, Jim." So, but it's not Old Number 7. Yeah. I was the beneficiary of those, of her not liking those, so that's great because my dad doesn't like whiskey. But and then my first experience with, I didn't drink too much until I got to college. I'm definitely caught up since then. But in high school, I was pretty square. My first experience with whiskey was Jim Beam.
Okay.
It was horrendous.
Yeah. Well, you know what? There's a lot of people that have that story. But what's the first whiskey that you tasted that changed your idea of what whiskey could be and how good it could be?
Oh man, that's a really, really tough question. It was definitely a bourbon. I'm looking at the bar right now, trying to see if I've got it up there. The Jim Beam small batch collection. I know a lot of people they love Booker's. But when the first time I tasted Baker's, Baker's is one of my all-time favorite whiskeys. It's incredible.
Not talked about a lot.
It's not talked about a lot, which I'll be honest with you, I kind of like, because I know that I can go into the store and it's always going to be there. A retailer hasn't figured that out and marking up the price. But Baker's, to me, it's just I got a sweet tooth, so I tend to I look towards those ones that have a really big fruit profile. Also, I call them the candy bar flavors. Marzipan, nougat, toffee. That's my jam right there. That's what I'm really looking for.
Awesome, man. I got you. Cool. Let's. You want to introduce we'll start with the Whiskey Row series.
Yeah. So, Old Forester's still, owned by Brown-Forman. Brown-Forman is still a family-controlled company. What they really wanted to do, starting about 4 years ago, was celebrate this history that they had with this whiskey. Not only of the history of Old Forester, but bourbon is America's spirit, and so they wanted to kind of pick some really, really relevant dates and styles, and then go with that. So the very first release they did was the Old Forester 1870, obviously to commemorate the first year that Old Forester was released. When I mentioned this earlier, that when they made this whiskey, they blended together whiskeys from 3 different distilleries. Well, obviously, Brown-Forman doesn't roll like that. We make 100% of our own distillate at this point.
So they had to emulate that process, is what they did.
Exactly. Yeah. And so what they did, Chris Morris is a genius, very, very creative, and he's as smart as a whip.
Yeah.
And what he said, he goes, well, I'll tell you what we'll do is we'll pull whiskeys that were made in different years, were put in different warehouses on different levels, and had a different barrel entry proof, and then blend those together. And then they landed at this, it's 90 proof. I think it's a really, really great, this is a bourbon for somebody who doesn't really like bourbon. It's fruity. It's got that kind of graham cracker sweetness to it.
Absolutely.
A kind of a cool story. Again, this is the Old Forester 1870 original batch, and it's 90 proof. And that was the first release.
You hit the nail on the head with fruit forward. It's just, it's extremely balanced. I could see this as, in the Whiskey Row series, we get a little more aggressive. We get there, but this is such a good, demonstration of, what you can do with the power of specific blends, and emulating that, that style. Chris Morris is amazing, man.
He's really changed, the way I drink spirits and learn about spirits, and also how I teach people about spirits. Yeah. It's funny because that manual sitting right next to you, that Certified Specialist of Spirits manual, I took that exam probably, I think, 6 years ago. You know who wrote that?
Was it Chris?
Chris Morris. And that was before I knew anything about
him,
like Chris Morris or Brown-Forman or any of these whiskeys. What Chris really likes to teach people is the sources of flavor. And that's how, to me, that's the one that really, really resonates. One, with bartenders. Two, with consumers. If you're talking about making cocktails or food pairings or cigar, I know you're big into cigars. Yeah. You want to, we're trying to pick out these flavors. Well, what's fascinating to me is that, straight bourbon whiskey it's made with grain, yeast, and water, and that's it. And how do you get all these other flavors? Well, Chris talks about these levers that you pull. I want to pull this lever to get another flavor out of there. Well, at Old Forester, they ferment this for 3 days, and when you ferment something for that long, you start getting a lot of these fruity esters. That balances that spiciness that you find in the rye and from the barrel. So it's and it adds complexity. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris is amazing. I've had the pleasure of hearing him speak on his experience and his growing up, and then how he envisions bourbon and how to reinvent it. What I like about his vision is he's not afraid to do something different. it's, yes, there is in bourbon, there's this long, rich history, and without, disrespecting that history, he still pushes the boundaries, whether it be with the things that happens with Woodford Reserve or what we're going through right now. It's not for the sake of doing things just to do it. He wants to experiment, wants people to engage whiskey differently.
Sure.
And for me, that was my biggest takeaway is he's like, we're not scared to take chances here. Why not? We have our staples, but we're also not afraid to go outside of the box a little bit. So
yeah, well, I mean, his mentor, was Lincoln Henderson. I mean, Lincoln Henderson was the master distiller for years before Chris took over, and Lincoln moved on. Obviously, he went on to create Angel's Envy with his son, which, a lot of these purists, they're like, that's not bourbon. And I'm like, well, okay, it's semantics at this point.
Right.
It's a bourbon finished in a wine barrel.
But it's okay if Makers takes French oak. You know what I mean? It's all part of everyone kind of taking little steps.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be bound by that.
Right.
I want to experience flavor, and making whiskey takes a long time. And we have these people that have invested their time and their job in creating really, really cool spirits that have a lot of different complexity. Yeah. And Chris will be the first one to admit that some of it doesn't work.
Sure. But that's part of figuring out what does work and what the public responds to. If you don't push the boundaries, no one will know. But can you speak a little bit on the mash bill?
Sure. So the mash bill for all of these whiskeys is going to be 72% corn, 18% rye. So pretty decent rye amount to kind of counteract the sweetness in that corn, and then 10% malted barley. That's another thing that I think is really cool, because all of these whiskeys that we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have 9 whiskeys in front of us. Yeah. They all have they're made with the exact same mash bill, and they all taste wildly different from each other.
Yeah, I love it. It's such a good example of, where can you push whiskey? What can it be? How can it be expressed by doing other things and changing the mash bill? Everyone always said grain mash bills, everything, but when you get into it, you're looking at, whether you're doing different yeasts, like some other bourbon, they may lean on that for their flavor varieties.
Sure.
But, it's also something to be said about, entry proof and which warehouse and which blend. So it's interesting. And I really was excited about this just for that fact alone. One solid mash bill. Let's see how different we can get. So
yeah,
I dig it. So let's, want to get on to the next in the whiskey row.
I suppose. So our the next year we came out with Old Forester 1897. This is our bottled and bond. So as we all know, bottled and bond has to be made at the same distillery, from the same distiller, in the same distillation season, which means from January to June or July through December. Yeah. Has to be aged for 4 years and bottled at 100 proof. Yep. It has to be aged for 4 years under government supervision. So
in the warehouses,
in a bonded warehouse. Yeah.
This
is when I do consumer tastings that with this lineup, obviously excluding the birthday bourbon, this is by far the most popular, probably well-rounded whiskey in this portfolio. Cool. It's amazing.
Cool. Let's get into it a little
bit.
And
I think people are, bottled and bond is not going away. I think people love it. It's got a certain ring to it. 100 proof, I think, is also a really, really great proof for bourbon. I mean, it's just it's right there. It doesn't, it's not gonna, if it's made well, it's not gonna hit you too hard. Mm-hmm. It also has, it's great to use in cocktails. 100 proof is an amazing, proof to use in all kinds, whether you're doing a stirred cocktail or a a citrus forward or fruity long drink. So
yeah,
I forgot to taste it.
Yeah, we got enough here. This is, as far as Whiskey Row, I really enjoy the next mark we're going to talk about, but that's just my specific palate. But this one just knocks it out of the park. What was the original purpose of Bottle and Bond for people listening that really don't know? I mean, because it was a weird time in whiskey when there was a lot of bullshit going on. So.
Sure. So, kind of this, one of the, the same reason why George Garvin Brown decided to put, whiskey in a bottle to protect it and to guarantee its authenticity. Not a lot of other distillers were doing the same thing. So we had a lot of bourbon. I'm using air quotes in this.
I say that so much in this podcast. I'm like, there are air quotes going on right now.
I'm sure people cannot. We don't even need to tell them that.
It's the pause.
So the government decided to step in and guarantee, whiskey or bourbon whiskey's authenticity and its quality, and so they stepped in. I also think that there was definitely a money play there, because
absolutely
there
always is, whether it be why we have to use new oak barrels. That could be, there's a whole political thing to that too, but
I don't know. We don't need to get into that. I'm a big believer in the new charred oak. I think it's what sets
bourbon apart from.
Yeah.
No, I love the rules. I'm just saying there may have been like some deals with.
Oh yeah, no doubt. With cooperages
and needing to
Sure.
But we found some good uses for those other barrels. But no, this is.
Yeah, this is a really well-rounded. You can drink it neat, which is my preferred. I don't like ice or water in my whiskey.
Yeah.
Unless it's. There's a couple like really high-proof ones that. I'm starting to get into the cask strength. Some I don't need to put water in. Some of them, it blows my palate away.
Too hot, so. Yeah. No, this is a great one, man. Getting back to what are some fads in whiskey that you're kind of sick of hearing?
Sick of hearing. Oh man, I don't want to name names, but
you don't need to name names, but like maybe trends that you're just like hoping kind of fade away, and the more positive things that come out of it.
Well, one, that is already on the way out is that whole White Dog whiskey or moonshine. And I'll be honest with you, I remember going to the Maker's Mark distillery and tasting their new make whiskey right off the still. One of the best single things I've ever tasted.
100%.
Unbelievable. The viscosity and the mouthfeel on it, the sweetness, the spicy, it was awesome. Yeah. But that's a very rare, very rare to find that. I work for a liquor distributor, and so we have a lot of these, white whiskeys that at the end of the day, it's just bourbon and American straight whiskeys get over 50% of its flavor from the barrel. And that's why, to me, the barrel maturation is so important. You get so much flavor, so much chemical change that, it chemically changes the whiskey.
Sure.
And all that is important, and that's kind of what I love about it. I think people, we've seen a lot, or we're still seeing some experimentation with barrel size and all that sort of thing. A lot of people will say, oh, well, you guys heat cycle your warehouses. That's kind of a shortcut, right?
Cheating,
I think I was with Jeff Arnett last week, and he said he looked up the definition of a shortcut, and it means to save money and time. And we may save a little bit of time on that, but it certainly costs a lot of money to keep those warehouses heated. And we didn't start doing this in the 80s and 90s when, we've thought about it. This has been going on for 50, 60 years.
Yeah, so being more efficient isn't necessarily meaning a worse product.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I would argue that, I tasted Early Times, when we don't call Early Times, well, they have an Early Times bottled in bond bourbon, but the Early Times that most people are familiar with, we call a Kentucky whiskey, because it is not a bourbon. It has been aged in a used bourbon barrel, and it's amazing. You get a lot of extraction out of, like flavor extraction out of the barrel because of that heat cycle warehouse and because of the fermentation process. But so I think the unaged whiskey is going to be, I don't see that being super popular.
That kind of, I could see reasons for it, right? New distilleries starting up, no one wants to sit on whiskey for 4 to 6 years before they can start selling. So you can see why, as craft distilleries took off, you can see why like moonshine started to take off, or they tried to get it to. And that was also, kind of bouncing back to the bartending industry as well, as you saw more speakeasies, more interest in old, ways of drinking. So, but yeah, I agree with you that most moonshine, doing air quotes again for moonshine, because it's not really just the White Dog, right? So you get why newer distilleries were going to do it.
Sure.
You can make some money.
I think that a really cool way to present that would be, calling it something, like how Herradura does it. And it's literally called straight off the still.
Right.
It's still strength. That is a way that I would like to see an unaged whiskey or unaged spirit presented. But, they take this new make, which we don't know what was in it or how they made it or who made it, and then they added water to it. And so it's just kind of, it's tough. But
yeah, no, I agree.
And then, I think that we're starting to see a lot of, the new, I don't know if you get the whiskey, never mind. I know you get the Whiskey Advocate.
Yeah.
And they had kind of a projection for 2018 and kind of what's in and what's out. And,
Yeah.
We're starting to see a lot more transparency. Like,
Sure.
I think it's, we see a lot of conversations about MGP up in Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
They make amazing distillates.
Sure.
And if you're a rectifier or a liquor producer and you're going to choose to use that, that's great. Just let us know. Like,
Yeah.
We want to know like where it was made. And I say that kind of in one hand, and then the other hand, I've got, we talk about a lot of very, one bourbon in particular that we really love, and there's not a lot of transparency, but
Sure.
dang, it's good.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of those conflicting, things where just lay it out, because we are at the point where people want some truth. I think this is the thing about particularly with bourbon in particular, especially here, as opposed to vodka or gin or whatnot. Not to get into those spirits, but it's our spirit. We're proud of it. We're proud of the standard that it sets. And we don't want any bullshit with it. That's part of why the rules exist, right? So when we hear of all this stuff, whether is sourcing bad, of course it's not bad.
No.
People, there's a lot of people, a lot of companies that do it really well, but they say they do it. There's nothing wrong with the art of blending or aging or whatever you want to do. I mean, we just have this negative connotation to it. Now, if somebody tells me this is our bourbon and it's Al Capone's cask and he found it in his basement and some other bullshit, I'm not going to name names, but that's when I'm
Rhymes
like,
with, no, I'm kidding.
right? Sounds like. That's when I start to get like, it may work for a portion of the general public, but that's not cutting it anymore. People are asking these questions.
Shrinking, like,
absolutely,
like exponentially, like getting smaller and smaller. The consumer is so much more knowledgeable. There's so much more resources out there, which I love. I mean, that when I go do, and I'm not even talking about a bartending training. When I go do a consumer-facing event and I engage with all these, we would call them the layman who doesn't, or the layperson who doesn't really, is not in the business, and they're so knowledgeable about bourbon production or whiskey production in general. It's incredible. So you can't. I don't think they're going to be able to get away with that for too much longer.
Yeah, I remember being behind the bar. I forget. It was probably at, I want to say the Showroom, which was weird. It was really early bartending, but it was just kind of as bourbon was taking off and whiskeys in general was starting to overtake vodka and brown spirits were. And someone came up to the bar, and this was before I even knew it. This was, really early on. They're like, "Hey, do you have any whiskey with, like a high rye mash bill?" And I'm like, "Oh shit." I'm like, "What?"
Better start reading.
Yeah, what does that mean? Now I'm behind, So it's kind of pushing everyone forward, but now you're getting those questions. You're coming to the bar and someone's saying, "Hey, I like a wheated bourbon. What do you have? If you don't, but I'm not really into makers or something. What else can you provide?"
Sure.
Or, so those questions being asked by more and more people, the bullshit's kind of starting to be stripped away, and then you're left with, a product that you can fully get behind, without feeling like you're selling yourself.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, it's obviously I'm in the business, so it's exciting because I feel like, all of that knowledge is it's driving sales at the end of the day. But it's really cool to see, things like this whole lineup that is kind of Chris Morris's baby, and and people are embracing it. So
yeah, and at the end of the day, like, after all the stuff kind of gets stripped away, we're left with better whiskey, I think, and I believe
100%.
So,
we are the beneficiaries of all that.
Absolutely. So what do we got next?
I think this is going to be the 1920.
Cool.
So this has a really cool story behind it. Thank you, sir. In addition to being America's first bottled bourbon, this has also been continually bottled and sold, like even through Prohibition.
During. Yeah.
So, 1919, the Brown family applied for and received a medicinal permit, which I find funny. There's a lot of parallel right now these days. When I go in there, again, air quotes, medicinal. But they applied for a medicinal permit because to sell this as medicine. Along, I think there were 5 other distilleries, so we weren't the only ones, but there were 5 others that got that same permit. So when we bottled this, we were like, okay, well, how can we do a Prohibition style? Like, what does that mean? Well, the caveat going into Prohibition was that the entry proof going into a barrel had to be 100. Usually we see it about 125.
Right.
I think Michter's is the only distillery that's even close to 100. They enter the barrel at 103, I think.
Yeah, something around there.
So that's 100 proof is really, really low. So it went into the barrel. After 4 years, you obviously have the angel share. Water evaporates faster than ethyl alcohol, so that proof rises. Mm-hmm. After 4 years, your proof's probably going to be around 113 to 118. So the way I describe this is that this is Prohibition style cask strength whiskey. So if I were to take a bottle up to a barrel of whiskey that got put in 1920, and 4 years later I pulled up a bottle and went up there and poured it out, no water, no nothing, it'd come out as 115 proof. And so this is kind of like our cask strength whiskey. I call this your choose your own adventure whiskey.
I love it.
A lot of people add water to this. I say the more you practice, the less water you got to put in there. But this is phenomenal.
Yeah. It's definitely a distinct style. It's obviously not a starting point, but it's, if you want something with a little more,
Sorry.
No, it's exactly what it is. No, it's probably one of my favorites, definitely from the lineup for sure. But
it's so good. It's so different from the other ones. It has this amazing texture to it. Obviously, you got to get past the alcohol, the bite on it, but it's really complex. I love I tell a lot of when I go train people about whiskey, I said, they're like, what's your favorite? And I said, it's hard to say. My favorite whiskey is typically whichever one is directly in front of me that I've been given permission to drink. But I love whiskeys that half an hour from now, if this was the last one I drank, and I breathe out and all of a sudden I get another flavor, that's incredible to me.
I was just gonna say, I was most impressed on this one with the finish. It does not stop and it keeps changing. So if you want a whiskey that's obviously it's going to be strong. That's the first thing you notice. It's going to have that proof. But if you want something complex that'll change over time and have a super long finish, amazing mouthfeel, like you can't go wrong here.
Sure. And the other thing, and we haven't really talked about this, and I didn't really want to get into it when you were like, what's the, what do you want to see go away? I mean, obviously, allocations. Sure. Allocations are tricky. It's kind of, some people would argue that it's all it does. It's capitalism at its finest, or it's a free market expressing itself. But it's difficult when you've got people who really, really want to enjoy this whiskey, but we can't find it at a retail price. You got to go into the secondary market and pay, 2 up to 9 times. I mean, I've seen crazy prices on some, a couple of different lineups that, and I'll be honest with you, I don't think I've even ever had any of those, but because they're so kind of inaccessible to me. But you can find this at any liquor store, and that to me, that's, if you can go in a liquor store and find a high proof bourbon that has a great story behind it, that what's in the bottle is delicious and complex, that's great. I did a really cool Jack Daniel's spirited dinner at the Palm Restaurant at Forum Shops on Friday night. Great crew. They've been going to this same dinner every year. It's usually the very opening of NFR is when we have it. Jeff Arnett's always there. It's the same consumer or same guests that are always there. And the woman was like, one of the ladies that was there asked me, she goes, my colleague is a huge bourbon fan, but he likes all these. And she started rattling off these bourbons that are really hard to find in this market at a reasonable price. She said, can you suggest, an alternate? And I was like, I gave her 1920 and Baker's. I said, you'll always be able to find it. Yeah. It's at a reasonable price, and your friend will love you. If they haven't tasted it, I think they'll be blown away. And if they have tasted it and familiar with it, they're going to think you're cool as shit.
Yeah. So, absolutely. No, it's
Can we cuss on here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Fuck yeah.
As a default, I put it as like 21 and up, so it's already labeled as that. So I think you can cuss.
Oh, I'll say earmuffs.
Okay, yeah, and air quotes. You have to say it before you get into it.
I'm gonna finish this one, by the way.
Yeah, I'm hanging on to it too. Color on this one too. Extraction obviously stands out.
It's huge. I mean, it's obviously, you got Chris Morris, and I don't know if you've met Jackie Zykan, who is the brand ambassador for Old Forester. She's not just the brand ambassador. I mean, she has got an incredible palate and she's from Louisville. Really, really great kind of handle on whiskey. And so she helps Chris pick out these barrels, which in the next one, she was, very instrumental in picking out those barrels. Really unique selection process on that. But the 1920 is incredible.
Cool. Is there, for the whiskey row series, are they done? Is that it, or are they
No. So the next one is going to be is our 2017. The label's a little bit different. Bottle's the same.
But it's part of the same.
Part of the same,
Okay.
and it's a permanent extinction. It's not going away.
Awesome. Cool. Let's talk about that one.
Yeah. So Old Forester Statesman.
When did this come out?
This was released. We released all these in the fall. So it came out, I want to say October. It was funny. I was doing a whiskey training at Casa Fuente in the Forum Shops, and about I think one or two doors down is the Art of Shaving.
Yeah, right.
And this was back in I think August, and I'm walking by with my little liquor bag or whatever, and I'm walking by and I just stopped I almost twist my neck because I've been waiting to get a taste of this Statesman for, I've been hearing about it. I'm excited about it. And all of a sudden I look in the mirror or look in the window and it's the Art of Shaving, and apparently Old Forester is a big partner with Art of Shaving, or the Statesman was a big partner with them, like a marketing partner.
Okay.
So they had a little old Statesman setup, and I pulled the bottle. I haven't even seen one yet. And I pulled up the bottle and I'm like, this is rad. Can I open this? Can I taste it? And they're like, I think pretty sure it's apple juice. But it said on the bottom, like, not
Displayed.
for sale, display, like not alcohol.
I got you.
So who knows what was in there, but it was pretty cool. It was the first time I saw the packaging.
Yeah.
So this kind of has an interesting story. Where to start on this one? So apparently, I don't know if you're familiar with Kingsman. The movie.
The movie. I a little bit.
So the first one came out a couple of years ago. I forget the exact name of it, but entertaining. It's pretty. It was kind of some of it's kind of tongue in cheek, but it was a well-made movie. They decided to do a sequel. In this particular sequel, the premise is that the cover story, and forgive me if I'm getting this a little wrong.
It's the Golden Circle, right?
The Golden Circle
Right.
is the new one, I think. But I was meant to watch that movie before we had this, but it just came out on like Netflix or whatever, literally last night. So I'll watch it tonight. I apologize if I'm getting this wrong, but the premise is that the cover story for these special agents in the UK is that they are distillers.
Okay.
Apparently, they need to go to the United States to save the world or the planet or whatever, and they want to have the same cover story. So they look to a bourbon distillery. And at the time, I remember hearing the story from Campbell Brown as he told it, is that they initially wanted to do Jack Daniels.
Okay.
Because everybody knows Jack Daniels. There's a relationship between the studio and Brown-Forman. And Campbell Brown was like, that's cool. Like, I understand Jack Daniels is great, but if you really want to be authentic, Old Forester was around and super popular, like back in when this movie is meant to take place. And they're like, cool, let's roll with it. So the premise, these spies or secret agents come over to the United States and they hook up with...
I love that you're just making up the movie as you go.
Pretty sure this may not be...
I hope it's nothing like this. That would, you're like, and then the aliens came and... All right, go ahead.
But, so we'll see. I'll check out the movie tonight, and I apologize if that's wrong. Please don't send this to my bosses, but I'll get another gig lined up. But anyhow, so... Okay, that's cool. We've got a studio partner wants to release a movie. Old Forester, the Statesman, is highly, highly visible throughout the movie. It's part of the storyline. What are we going to do for a whiskey?
Right.
So what they did, Chris and Jackie said, you know what? Let's to your point earlier, we don't really have hotter floors of the rick house. But what we do is we have parts of the warehouse that are right next to the heating ducts, or right next to the windows, or right next to the doors that are hotter.
Right.
They pick barrels right next to the heating ducts. So it saw more like expansion and contraction. They bottled this at 95 proof. I asked Chris Morris, why 95 proof? And I'm always, especially when I talk to a chemist or a distiller, I'm expecting a very technical answer. I'm there ready with pen and paper.
Sure.
Ready to write down. He said, because it tasted the best at 95. I'm like,
perfect.
Is that it? No, but it's at the end of the day, distiller's prerogative is a viable answer. Like,
yeah,
I'll
absolutely.
take it. Like, if that's what they decide that they want to bottle it at, I trust you.
Yeah, this is
it right here?
Yeah.
You tasted it?
Yeah, a little bit.
It's also minimally filtered. So it is, a lot of these, they go through, and we don't need to get into the filtration process, but, you can do cellulose or chill filter, all that kind of stuff. This is very, very, basically they are filtering out the bits, we don't want you getting splinters while you're drinking bourbon, but very minimally filtered, so you get a lot of texture and mouthfeel.
I was about to say the mouthfeel on this is fantastic.
It's fantastic. And it's 95 proof, which is a really cool. So sometimes I'll see people, if we were doing a flight, maybe I would move the Statesman in between the 1870 and 1897, but we're going in chronological order.
Rather than how your palate should adjust as, working your way up. Yeah.
But I think, because typically, to your point, when we do flights, we go from low proof to high proof, but I think they did a really good job with this. They decided, it's always a dilemma when these suppliers talk about, is this going to be a permanent line extinction? Is this just going to be a limited offering? It's been extremely well received.
I was about to ask what the reception was on it.
We did a really soft, so it's funny because this movie launched, and I'm going to use that as my excuse for not having seen it yet, but it launched the same weekend as Life is Beautiful.
Okay, yeah, that's
so Jack Daniels is
for you guys. That's
we're a huge sponsor of Life is Beautiful, and our bandwidth is only so big, so we kind of had to make a decision. Like, we just can't really do a type of launch. In other markets, they did huge launches with VIP screenings and all that stuff. And then with that, we also, with our sales teams, we didn't force it down their throat. And what ended up happening was they actually started getting calls from, bar owners saying, "Hey, what about the Statesman?" Which
that's awesome.
It's organic, and that's at the end of the day, you can't pay for that.
Yeah.
So and you don't have to. So
exactly, it's kind of funny. I had a few to drink when I first tried this, but the first time I had this was in Seoul, South Korea, and I sent you the picture. I go, it
was crazy.
I was at Alice, a really cool bar in South Korea. But yeah, they go, "Hey, have you had this yet?" I'm like, "No, I'm in Korea having a bourbon for the first time."
Yeah.
So it was just a great one.
What do you think?
It's fantastic. Yeah. Absolutely fantastic. It's readily available.
100%. Yeah, it's not allocated at this time. And let me tell you, we ever got on allocations. I'm not saying I'd be mad at it, but we go into these things. Brown-Forman's super sharp on how they want to approach these, and we want to make sure that for instance, the Jack Daniel's rye that we just launched, it's very strategic because we were very slow to the game to release a straight rye whiskey that, we released the single barrel rye a couple of years ago, but the Jack Daniel's rye, it's supposed to be pretty much kind of line priced or the same price as Old No. 7.
Mm-hmm. Which is amazing.
To
say that,
it's bottled at 90 proof.
Right.
Old No. 7's at 80 proof. It's a different mash bill altogether.
More expensive grain.
It's 70% rye, which we source all of that rye from Poland. So, it's economically, I don't even know how they did that. But we didn't want to, we don't want to be, I was kidding. I was kidding, guys. We don't want to be allocated. We want this to be, like, Jack Daniel's needs to be available. And same with Old Forester. We want this to be available, except for maybe the birthday bourbon.
Sure. But that, special release. But, coming from bartender, bar manager side of it, in my experience, let's say I was creating a cocktail for a menu. One of my first questions is, am I going to be able to get this every week?
100%.
it's such a pain in the ass to put something new and cool on a menu because it's new and cool, and then 2 weeks, no, they ran out.
We've had people return highly allocated allocated whiskeys because they only could get 2 of them, and they said, you know what, that's
Not
cool.
worth it.
I don't even want those 2. I don't even want to put it on my menu. I don't want to, and I'm like, well, I'll take it, but which I can't. It's a 3-tier system.
Yeah, and it depends. It definitely right. It depends on your bar, your situation. Sure. If you have a huge collection, of course you can have one-offs and update your menu. But for a constant stream to keep that consistency of service with your guests, you don't want them coming in the next day with a friend and saying, "Hey, I want the slippery douchebag cocktail, whatever it's called." That's not a good name. Don't use that one. But
don't worry about that.
Right. But, you don't want them ordering that because it was the best cocktail they ever had. So they brought their friends in, and then you going, well, it's out.
I got to make it with something else. Or
yeah.
It's
one of my
difficult.
biggest pet peeves with cocktail bars. So, but before we get into the birthday bourbon, let me ask you a couple more questions.
Sure.
What advice do you have for people looking to expand their whiskey horizons, whether it be here or, just listening where this may be overwhelming to them. Like, oh my God, there's all these numbers and prohibition and bottled and bond. And where are the baby steps to get them kind of to explore?
Sure. That's a great question. Listen, I remember 10 years ago, I tried to go, I was bartending on Dixon Street, which is kind of the main drag in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And we had this new restaurant open up called Theo's. Amazing. It's still there. Amazing restaurant. Kind of fancy. And at the time I was drinking, beer and whatever, vodka Red Bulls. I was
right.
Yeah, I was trying.
That's why you came to Vegas.
I was trying to get crunk, dude. I didn't have a palate. I did not have a palate. I could not appreciate like good spirits. And I went down there and I tried to drink this. I was like, hey, I want to drink some scotch. I think he tried to pour. I think he was pouring me like Talisker or something, or Old Man, and it was something. And I was like, dude, I can't drink that.
Wow.
So even like 9-10 years ago, I couldn't even smell whiskey. And it wasn't actually until I started at the Cosmopolitan where those guys they were like, well, what kind of whiskey do you like? And I was like, I can't drink whiskey. And they're like, well, that's going to have to change like right away because you have to have an appreciation for it.
Sure.
So Paul Bacult has been an amazing like mentor, even though he may not even know that. But like I've been reading Kindred Spirits 2 was one of the first books that I picked up, and it reads like a encyclopedia, right? It's not in prose, it's in reference form.
Yep.
But his descriptions of alcohol, I have 2 copies. I have one in my office back there, and I have one on my desk at work, and it's still my reference on researching whiskeys. And then I've been subscribing to his spirit journal for I don't even know how long.
Yeah.
He's an incredible teacher. He has a really, really cool perspective on spirits. Fred Minnick has some amazing books out. Bourbon Curious is awesome.
Fantastic, yeah.
He's got another one just released. I can't remember I can't really remember the name of it, but it's like Bourbon America's Spirit or something like that.
I forget what it's called.
There are a ton of incredible books on Amazon that you can get on this subject. And I tell people, like, read as much as you can.
Yeah.
That's one thing that's helped me out was that I've gobbled up as many books as I possibly can. And sometimes I read them from cover to cover, and sometimes I just use them as a reference. Go to your liquor store. Total Wine has an amazing collection. Top Shelf Liquors has an amazing collection. Issa Corey over at Corey's Fine Wine.
Yeah.
He has an amazing collection. He's also one of those it's kind of like a mom and pop store where he can, if you have something that maybe they may not have, Issa is super approachable where you can say, hey, can you order this for me?
Yeah.
But, and then also, go to bars and you had a great idea earlier before we got set up here. And we were talking about blind tasting and you said, go to the bar that you trust, go to a bartender that you trust. Tell him your budget. You don't want him pouring something that's going to be ridiculous because he thought it was rad. And then you're like, well, whoa, dude.
Yeah.
Tell him your budget, and then have him pour something that maybe he likes and taste it blind.
Yep.
And then go home and learn everything you can about that spirit, like everything you can. There's so much I tell people a lot of times they're like, how do you know that? I'm like, because I have 2 degrees. I have a degree from the University of Arkansas, and I have a degree from Google.
Right.
Like, there's so much information out there and I know people say, oh, if it's on the internet, it's not necessarily true. But for the most part, they're really great resources. Whiskey Advocate is another great. They've got I get their quarterly magazine, but also they've got an incredible website. If you want to look up reviews on whiskey just to get a perspective, I would suggest that you do that after you've tasted it. You create your own idea in your head of the quality and the flavors that you found out, and then compare notes.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't stress that enough, that whole, blind tasting, the books, that's great. Another thing that I suggest is try to find like-minded people in your city, wherever you are. There's going to be somebody that's into it. Search the internet to see if there's whiskey groups or bourbon groups, or get together and go into the bar is a great idea, because you don't have to commit to a whole bottle. So if you have that resource in your city, I think you're fortunate to take advantage of it. But
sure. And then one other thing that I can add on that is that when you're sitting down and tasting the whiskey in the glass, Paul Bacult does a really, especially in his book, and he's clinical.
Yep.
When it comes down to this. He does his tastings at the same time of day every day. It's usually in the morning when his palate's clear. He hadn't had,
chocolate gravy.
Chocolate gravy.
Right.
I'll Google that. But you have to treat it like you're kind of diving into something and wanting to learn about it. And to do that, you need to be free of distractions. You need to be, of clear mind and with a. Don't go smoke a Parliament or a cigar right before you do that. I don't smoke cigars, but I tell you what, I did big smoke with. I was doing Sinatra Select.
You throw up?
No, it was amazing.
Okay, good.
But I don't smoke cigars. But somebody, there's amazing cigars, and I have all these. I'm sitting there giving all these guys, huge pops of Sinatra Select, so they're just throwing me cigars.
Back at you.
So I was like, you know what, I'll light one up, and I lit one up, and I'm sitting there doing smoking the cigar and tasting the whiskey. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. It's like a food pairing. When things go together, it's great.
Yeah. The what is it? The sum of the
parts is greater than the
we're in the same boat. Stuff.
Yeah. Let's do birthday bourbon. No,
you want to get onto that?
No. What do you have?
I have a couple more questions, but just because it kind of goes along with that same topic, what's a really unlikely whiskey food pairing or anything pairing that you've found? Or someone comes up to you and says, hey, I heard about wine pairings. Like, if I buy so-and-so bourbon, what would you recommend pairing that with?
Oh, that's a tough question.
It's tough.
The reason why it's tough is because to me these are all so different from each other.
Yeah. Or just one that you found that you like to enjoy. Like you said, you by chance found the cigar and a bourbon.
I mean, short ribs and like
anything.
But like a short ribs and a really, really either an older bourbon or one. Let me rephrase that. One that has an extremely large amount of barrel influence. I'm thinking of like Woodford Reserve Double Oaked.
Okay.
When you drink those two together, it's amazing. I'll tell you another. Actually, I just thought of that. Brussels sprouts, like roasted Brussels sprouts,
okay.
and rye whiskey. You have that kind of herbaceousness.
Sure.
With rye whiskey, I get dill and green apple, like are really usually. Really prevalent, and it just pairs amazingly with. And people, when they taste it, they're like, "Holy shit, that's
what I was after." Because everyone has some weird. It just takes a little bit of like.
And obviously, the Brussels sprouts got to be prepared the right way. But,
right, you can't cover them and whatever.
Yeah, it's got to be
pretty clean.
Pretty clean, but Brussels sprouts and rye was it was a really, really good. And I think the Brussels sprout dish was even kind of decadent. It had, I think, some really nice bacon in there, but the acidity in that rye just cuts right, and the spice cuts right through it.
That's awesome, man. What's a whiskey bar that you've been to that really stuck out in your mind, or that you'd recommend?
In town?
Anywhere. Hopefully people are listening all over, but in town, and then kind of
In town, shoot, there's a lot. I don't want to upset people if I miss it, but Whiskey Down is incredible.
Yeah.
Whiskey Down has probably one of the largest barrel, and they have the privilege of being, it's MGMRI. MGMRI has the wherewithal to kind of go pick these barrels out. They have probably one of the largest single barrel selections.
Really?
Out there, or at least in this town. It's
cool.
Incredible. Obviously, I remember one of my very first experiences traveling and actually going to a bar. And I know you do this all the time, but I tell this a lot to a lot of young bartenders. They're like, how do I learn? I said, go travel and go 100%. Do it go to other bars, not to get drunk, but to watch what they're doing and to taste what they're making. $7,000 was incredible. Like in LA, it was kind of mind boggling how these bartenders, they're so passionate about, what they have there. And, it's an amazing bar. Whiskey Down's great. Sage is obviously one of the best. Aaron is knowledgeable as it gets. He's a geek just like us when it comes to whiskeys, and not just bourbons. Like it's, that's the thing too, is like I tend to focus more towards American whiskey, but there's this whole other world out there, like Japanese whiskeys, scotches. Asian not even Japanese, like Asian. Taiwan. Yep. It's huge. Indian, there's a whole nother world out there, but Aaron is amazing, and Sage is, and then plus you get to eat rad food. But
killer. Delmonico's the same way for me.
Delmonico, yeah.
Yep. But yeah, shout out to Aaron. Go see him at Sage if you're in Vegas, because you can't be disappointed going to that place.
I'm still, when I walk into that bar, and just because of this is my life and this is what I do. When I go into bars, the bartender's trying to talk to me, and I'm just scanning the back bar. Well, it's funny because I think that my bosses think that I'm grading the bar, because that's kind of what we have to do. Yeah. I'm not. I'm looking for shit I want to drink. So they're like, well, how many brands we got back there? I'm like, huh? But he's still, every time I go in there, I see something that I've rarely seen before. And kudos to the guys over at Aria. Those guys are doing an amazing job. They get some
special stuff too.
They get some special stuff. You know what? Speaking of Re-Raw has a unbelievable. I know it's kind of it's an Irish. It's an Irish pub. Yeah. It's a really cool spot.
Cool.
But the whiskey selection that they've put together there is phenomenal.
That's cool. That's
so go. It's probably one of the biggest in the city.
Cool. God, I gotta go. Have you been to Cannon?
Yeah. I went to Cannon actually with my sister.
Seattle.
In Seattle. This is way back in like 2011.
Did you use the bathroom?
Excuse me. No.
Where's this conversation going?
I'm absolutely positive I took a leak there, but
but yeah. So they have they have a certain single oak project. Some brand does it, but it's lined in their bathroom.
Oh,
so
no kidding.
in like cages. So like they have the whole line there.
So in full disclosure, when I went there, it was for I flew into my very first Tales of the Cocktail was at Tales on Tour in Vancouver.
Okay.
And my sister lives in Olympia, so I flew in and flew into Seattle and then took the train up to Vancouver, which was super rad, by the way. So we went to Cannon. In full disclosure, at that moment in my professional life, I was more focused on cocktails.
Sure.
And so obviously going to Jamie Boudreaux's bar, he was there. He was super cool, very gracious. This was before I think they really kind of turned that corner on the world's most amazing
biggest collection.
Mm-hmm. Another one I'd love to go back. Another one that's on my list is the
Multnomah Whiskey Library.
Yeah,
in Portland.
That's pretty ridiculous. That's your hometown. Or?
Yeah. I grew up in Portland, but definitely wasn't a thing then. But I'll go back now, and it's just like.
How do you pronounce that?
Multnomah. What did I say?
No. I'm
Multnomah Whiskey Library.
So if I said Multnomah,
that's probably not right. So we get what else?
Well, I'm allowed to mispronounce almost everything.
Yeah, you're reckoned to do that.
I reckon one of these days I'll figure out how to say that.
Yeah, so it's one of those places too for me where I walk in and it's like overwhelming. Like I'm like, where do I start? You know what I mean?
Especially if you're visiting.
Yeah, absolutely. So if it's your bar and you're real close, I think they have 2 locations now to help break it up. But it's one of the best. What's your perfect day off? Because I know you're into like getting away, and a lot of times, people listen to this aren't going to be from Las Vegas, and they think, oh, it's just a strip. Do you guys live in casinos and stuff like that? Just kind of getting away from this a little bit. But what's a perfect day off for you?
We're lucky here, man. I mean, it's I grew up in Arkansas. I was in Boy Scouts. I grew up camping and hiking and fishing and water skiing, and that was that's how I grew up. So when I moved out here, I wanted to kind of, before I moved out here, I was fishing every weekend. I got a little 10-foot canoe I was putting into a river and fishing on a little, micro rig for smallmouth bass.
Yeah.
You catch a smallmouth, like a 1-pound smallmouth bass on a 4-foot rod with a micro reel and 3-pound test, it feels like you're catching like a sailfish. Right. So the fishing out here, not gonna lie, it's extremely disappointing.
Right.
I think obviously we got Lake Mead there, but you kind of have to have a boat. I'm not a big lake fisherman, but you got Red Rock, Valley of Fire, Mount Charleston, and then if you have a little bit of time, I mean, literally, if you and I went down to the garage, got in my car, we could be at the gates of Zion in less than 3 hours, and I drive like a grandma. So that's incredible. I mean, we're talking about one of the most prolific and amazing national parks in the world. We're right in the middle of it. We're in the epicenter of that. And so, Red Rock is incredible. I'll tell you, for a long time, I was, in the bartending world. So my days off were kind of midweek, which is great. My days off now are Saturdays, Sundays. So when I go to Red Rock, it is not the most original idea.
Yeah, right.
It's same with Mount Charleston, but we've got an amazing ski resort. Lee Canyon is awesome. Yeah. But Red Rock is literally one of those things. I've gone, if I have an hour, I can pop out there and just drive the loop, and I'm a brand new person.
Yeah. And
I don't even get out of the car. Like it's one of the things. I actually just bought my 2018. Well, I didn't. It's not a 2018, but since I moved out here, every single year I spend $80 and I get the annual National Park Pass. Yeah. And that's paid for itself over and over and over and over. Sure. And it just lets you go anywhere you want. But we're right in the middle. I mean, we're what is it? 5 hours to Grand Canyon?
Yeah, I think this is insane to say, but I've been in Vegas for 13 years, never been to the Grand Canyon yet. It took me a long time to get to the Hoover Dam, and that's even closer because I never went to Arizona either. So
I would say that my perfect day is waking up.
That's good. That's a good start.
Going to Bagel Cafe, having a salmon or a bagel and lox, and then going to Red Rock for the day, and then stopping by at a couple liquor stores and seeing if they got rad bourbon, and then coming home and chilling.
Perfect.
So I'm pretty easy.
Perfect. Dig it. So let's want to get on to the birthday bourbon?
So birthday bourbon.
So just to let you guys know what we got lined up here is,
and I apologize in advance. This is awfully decadent.
Yeah, so this is pretty cool. I mean, if you want to tell kind of the story of birthday bourbon, we have the 2014, the 16, and the 2017.
And the
correct?
17, yeah. So every year, we all have birthdays, obviously. But September 2nd happens to be George Garvin Brown's birthday.
Right.
And Brown-Forman or Old Forester, I want to say, was it 2000? I think it was 2003 or 2002. Was the first year they decided to commemorate this birthday with what they called birthday bourbon. It's probably one of the most unique packages that I've ever seen. There's only one other bottle that even comes close to it. The Willet Pot Still is kind of close, but this is a really short, squatty bottle. It looks like, you remember the little pieces from Life?
Yeah,
that's what it looks like. But it's got good like liquor in it. So every year we've been releasing this. It has been when we talk about like the Van Winkles and the Buffalo Trace Antique Collection, Old Forester Birthday Bourbon is right up there with
sought after.
It's highly sought after. It's highly allocated.
Yeah.
Which I feel bad because working for these brands and Old Forester in particular. I mean, when I first started, the very first thing people said, well, yeah, just take a sip there, buddy.
Sorry.
No,
I was letting you.
No, I'm kidding.
Now everyone knows how rude I was there.
No, sorry. I kid. But it was like, hey, how can you get me some of that birthday bourbon? And it's tough. I really is like, we're challenged. We get a certain amount every year. We have to support the bars and the restaurants that support us. And so, these bars and restaurants that have Old Forester Classic in the Well and have Whiskey Row, they are the ones that get the birthday bourbon. Yeah. But that being said, you can find it, in a lot of different bars around the city. But it's incredible. So we don't do any age statements on any of our bourbons.
I was just going to ask that.
Except for birthday bourbon. So birthday bourbon is always going to be a 12-year-old whiskey. They are hand-selected by Jackie Zykan and Chris Morris. And they're always different. And that's the cool part about, that's kind of the cool part about bourbon in general, is that when you pick a vintage whiskey or this isn't a single barrel because we're bottling a couple different barrels at a time, but I think we did... Actually, I don't want to talk about. I don't know the exact case count.
Yeah, I got a few. So we're tasting the 14 now.
14.
It was middle floors of warehouse G and I, which resulted in a very even temperature exposure, is what they said on. That was the note on this one. So yeah, I love that. If you collect these, if you're lucky enough to be able to put, and then you taste them side by side. I mean, that's
100%. I mean, it's a holy grail. In fact, I saw. A buddy of mine posted on Facebook, and he said he's been working on this for a couple years, and he posted every single birthday bourbon from, was it 2002? I think it's 2002.
Yep, 2002 is when it came out. In 2003, it won, let's see, I don't want to, American Whiskey of the Year at the Whiskey Fest in New York. So right off the bat, it was winning awards.
Yeah, I mean, it's a spectacular whiskey. And if you think about a 12-year whiskey that has been in that environment where we are doing the heat cycling, you're getting up there in like what the equivalent would be in a regular rick house. And also it's hand selected by Chris Morris, who has one of the best palates I've ever.
Yeah, his approach to it, and
he divides up flavors and can talk about and knows about flavors almost as good as anybody I've ever heard of. But
absolutely, what I like about birthday bourbon when I first had it was. So my sweet spot for bourbon, it depends on the brand, and there's a lot of things, but generally it's 12 to 15 is like my sweet spot, right? Anything above 15, I've had some that are good, but that's just the general rule for me. But to me, this drink's like a little bit older, and it might be from that, from that heat exposure and whatnot. But it's always pretty killer.
This is my first time having the 2014. I know I've had the 2013. 2013 is they enjoyed a lot of success. I think Whiskey Advocate rated it as a 96. I think 2013 is the highest rated birthday bourbon that's been out there.
Okay.
It's incredible. And then I've had the 2015. That's good. This is awesome.
It's pretty solid.
It's got like some herbaceousness in there. That's
yeah, I always get, especially I probably with the most of the line too, is I get some mintiness too. It's pretty common, but particularly with the Old Forester. But this is another thing too, is like, it's so sought after. But is there a better, you're having a child, is there a better bourbon to grab, when they're born and then give it to them when they're, on their birthday?
It's got it in the name.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer, but it's such a good. It has the history, but it's such a cool story. It's such a cool expression.
Imagine if your kid was born on September 2nd.
Yeah.
Like, how rad would that be?
Right.
I made this for you, Billy. I don't have a kid named Billy, but
that you know of.
Yeah.
But
this is phenomenal. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. We got a couple more to go, and these. I was excited. I texted you about coming over. I'm like, which ones you got? I thought it was just one, so I'm excited.
No, I got So it's kind of one of the perks of the job. Actually, I say that I actually have to go see. I have to hunt these just like everyone else. I do not. These are not given people.
Right.
I think that's a kind of a misunderstanding, is that people just.
I love
think
it. Hey, do you have a birthday bourbon in your trunk?
I don't. And I have really cool stories behind like both of them. Like the 2000.
Sure.
Well, actually, we just killed my first bottle of 2016, but we got to back up. But the first one I bought. I actually bought it Total Wine. I woke up one Saturday morning in September, and I knew that the allocations had just gone out. and I just had this feeling. I was actually down at the fitness center, and which is weird, all in and of itself. But I had this kind of feeling. You ever get a feeling like I feel lucky, and I called Total Wine in Boca Park. I said, hey, and I spoke with the young lady, answered the phone, and I'm sure you've had this experience before. These are our liquor stores are getting way better at like really understanding spirits and those esoteric things that we really like, because a lot of other people are really liking those too. I mean, we've got a craft. There's literally something at Boca Park called Craft Corner.
Yep.
Which is all craft spirits. But I called and I said, hey, I'm looking for this bottle of bourbon called Old Forester Birthday Bourbon. She said, hold on just a second. She put her manager on the line, and he goes, it's funny you asked for that, because it just got hand delivered 2 days ago. I'm like, oh, that's actually a coincidence. Yeah, I knew it got delivered, but
right.
And he said, well, I'm supposed the thing says that I have one bottle
in inventory somewhere.
In inventory, but it's not where it's meant to be. And I'm like, of course it's not.
Yeah.
Like somebody like stashed
an
it
employee
somewhere.
has their Post-it note with their name on it somewhere.
And he goes, give me your name and number and I'll call you back. So I gave my name and number. I'm like, I'm never going to hear from this guy again. Mm-hmm. Sure enough, like 30 minutes later, he calls me and he said, hey, I found it. Now, technically I can't hold it for you. I said, no, I get it. He goes, but I'll put it at the front with your name on it. If somebody else comes in and asks for it, I have to give it to him.
Sure. How fast did you drive that day?
I got there in 19 minutes. So it was Saturday morning. Like it was super. And I told him I'd be there in 20. So I show up there, and the young lady at the customer service, I walk in, I said, hey, I talked to, I won't name names because I think that I'm actually, I don't know if I should be telling this whole story, because I think some people got in trouble for it.
Okay.
Because it was meant for other people.
No one listens to this. Doesn't matter.
I'm Mike Doyle, bitch. No, I'm kidding. So she goes, I just want you to know I sold a bottle of this yesterday and I got a hug. I'm like, bring it in.
Yeah.
So anyways, she rang me up. I walked out of there like on a cloud nine. I could not believe that I just found this.
Awesome.
It was incredible. And I paid retail for it.
I was about to say, what is retail on it?
It's gone up, and I think that's kind of to protect I think last year I paid $90 for it.
Okay. Originally it was really cheap.
It was really cheap. It was like $60, like $59.99 was like MSRP. I think that the last round, when 2017 came out, the price that Total Wine, because I did the same thing. I went looking around, and I tell you what, you want to try to, if you don't know liquor store owners or managers and you go in trying to look for a highly allocated, you get the best giggles ever.
Oh, it's awesome.
Hey, I'm looking for Old Forester Birthday Bourbon.
Yeah.
That was here for 10 minutes, bro.
Yeah.
So literally there are people waiting for this.
Sure.
And I think they sold it for around $120, which is I would buy in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
The 2017 that we're drinking, or that we will drink in a minute, I actually bought from Liquor Library.
Okay.
I was on my way back from I can't remember where, but I popped in because Liquor Library has, they really like to find some pretty esoteric stuff. Mm-hmm. They obviously mark it up a little bit. I mean, it's at the airport. It's like,
sure.
Obviously the cheeseburger at Wendy's is shouldn't be $7, but it's gonna be. So
right.
You would expect to pay a little bit more. But when something is that highly allocated, you're
gonna expect it.
I'm gonna expect it. But so yeah, some fun stuff. So
cool.
2016.
Awesome.
We're gonna skip 2015 and go to 2016.
Just because.
What is this?
Yep, that's it.
Oh, so when I first smelled this whiskey, it was one of the most complex. It smelled like it was alive. It was incredible. It blew me away. And go for it.
Let's see.
And these have been sitting in the glass for a bit.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, this is the 15th anniversary release of the birthday bourbon itself. This is unusual because it came from the same floor and the same warehouse, very warm location. So they're saying tasting notes on this are really deep oak forward whiskey.
So when people say oak forward, like what do you think about that when people say oak forward?
To me, the first thing I think of if I'm getting like a tannic dryness, I'll say oak forward.
Got it.
To me. But I think a lot of times if you get a ton of vanilla and caramel, people will say it's oak forward. So I interpret oak a little differently, maybe.
That makes sense to me. I mean, I can see that. Like when I use the term oak influenced, and when I say that, I'm like, I don't, because tannic to me is not something I look for in a whiskey. I'm not really looking for that dryness. If I want a dryness, I'm going to go to like a Armagnac or a rye, like, or go to something different. But when I'm drinking bourbon, I'm looking for those. I call them the candy bar flavors, like caramel, nougat. Marzipan is one of my. It's a flavor that one of my most favorite flavor memories is marzipan, because my mom used to always get me those little pretty like fruit painted or fruit shaped marzipan candies when I was for every Christmas, and it was always in my stocking.
And if you know it, you know that flavor.
And you know that flavor. And when I taste that, it takes you, that's why we call it flavor memory, because it brings back this memory that you've got. So when I talk about oak, I talk about like oak influence, and it's that vanilla, cinnamon, nutmeg, and then those candy bar flavors. Toffee is one of my like, you give me a really, really toffee forward bourbon, and I'm gonna love it right off the bat. Like, because I think that is it creates this nuance that, because toffee doesn't exist in a new make spirit.
Sure,
it's completely from the barrel.
Yeah.
But and then we haven't even gotten into like barrel treatment, like as far as seasoning, toasting, and charring.
Right.
But that's a whole nother podcast. But
absolutely. But yeah, it's weird the flavors that are, how people describe flavors. For me, like distinctive flavors, like creme brulee.
Yep.
Sometimes, with where you're getting the astringency and stuff like that, I get like sometimes burnt sugar. Like yes, it's sugar based, right? It's derivative.
Sure.
But what's the condition and how was it? And I had what whiskey was I drinking? It's in the last podcast, but immediately it was Honey Nut Cheerios, and I'm like, oh man, it's like
if you can pull if you can pull up a food item that directly, like, to me that is, I mean, you want to talk about a bartender or a server who's trying to explain a spirit, and if you can tell them like what type of food that reminds them of, especially if it's something as cool like honey. I mean, who didn't grow up on Honey Nut Cheerios? Like, and for me that was a treat. I didn't get a lot of sugar, and I was like, I made up for it since. It's probably why I have a sweet tooth. But I always I had to tolerate regular Cheerios, which is bullshit. But anyways,
that's another podcast.
That's another podcast too. But Honey Nut Cheerios was like a treat when I got to eat that. But everyone knows what Honey Nut Cheerios taste like. And if you can describe that, and that's what I always try to tell these bartenders, like, look, we're looking for flavors. Yes, that's cool. But nobody wants to hear you rattle off. No. Does it taste like a score bar that you had when you were like 12 and the first candy bar that you had? Like, that's what really people sink their teeth in. That's going to make them buy that. Right.
Yeah, it happens in a lot of different spirits, and wine in particular. If you can, it depends on who you're talking to and how they relate flavor. But at the base level, if you can just get that relation to something that's universally recognized, it's hard to say. For some people, it's hard to say, a marzipan or something like that. A lot of people will get that, but where you get into like there's damp earth and it's like, whoa, hold the fuck on. Like,
trust me, I've been in those where people have been like, they're like, oh, I don't have a really good and listen, my palate is not. It's taken me a lot. Like Doug Frost has taught me a lot on how to develop my palate.
Some of the best blind tastings on YouTube too, where he wraps the bottles in aluminum foil and he's spitting into Five Guys cups.
Yeah, no,
Doug Frost is amazing, man.
He is amazing, and he has a really, really great way to teach people on how to do that. He told me one time, he's like, look, you can't, like, your sense of taste is what it is. Yep. You have to learn how to work inside of that. Yeah. Which, and I grew up with allergies. It's taken care of. Like I manage it now, but my sense of smell is awful. I smoked for a long time. Just kidding, Dad. But it was. You have to work inside what you got. Sure. And that takes a lot of practice. Yeah. But when you can relate that to like a food item, it's
for me, it's finding common ground. if you hear an expert say marzipan or whatever, and I'm like, well,
Pound cake, almond pound cake.
yeah, I was about to say almond, and I hear that, at some point you start relating what you taste in it with what other people taste in it and kind of get this common ground. So you end up speaking the same language eventually. And that's kind of what it's about. It's eventually translating and like speaking the same language of taste.
Sure.
And everyone, obviously, whether you smoke, what you ate, the pH, your body's
what time
natural,
of day it is, like it's
everything.
Always different.
You're always going to get different, different flavors. And that's where I tell people, a lot of new tasters too into bourbon and spirits and wine too is they'll be like, oh, well, I didn't get the cherry cola, I didn't. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. That's not wrong. That someone else got it. Build your own library over time, and then
I can tell people I'll tell people don't ever be discouraged by reading another
tasting notes
or review and being like, I didn't get any of that. That is not what that's for. Mm-hmm. That is that person's. That is Dave Broom's opinion. That is Paul Bacalt's opinion. That is Fred Minnick's opinion, based on the years that they've been alive and what they've had to eat, and quite frankly, what they had to eat that day,
right?
And what time of day it was,
and their library of flavors,
their flavor memory,
yeah.
And what I try to impress and impart on people is you just have to be able to express yourself in what you think it is. Like we talked about this earlier. Like don't say smooth.
Yeah.
Smooth is like, that's great. I mean, it's great that it's smooth, but that doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah.
And I'm as guilty of it as possible.
Of course, I've done that too, and it's
knowing your audience and knowing what you truly tasted there.
Yeah, I have a funny thing with my wife. Like I'll cook something, or cocktails too, but I'll have her try it, and she goes, "It has good flavor." I'm like, "What the fuck does that mean?" For a while, I'm like, "What else do you got?" And now she kind of like, "Oh, it's spicy with a little whatever." But at first, she's just like, she just meant a lot was going on. So I think where the smoothness is derivative from, whether it be sweetness, perceived sweetness, texture, mouthfeel, like all that, then you can break down why it's smooth. But saying smooth at first is like, the proof is a huge part of that. Whether people think the finish, I mean, there's just so much more to break down. Oh, that's smooth, but it's almost the same thing.
But if you want to get into it and you really want to understand it, like you have to build it's a vocabulary thing, right?
Sure.
It's a vocabulary thing, and it's an exercise in I'm focusing on this one right now.
Yeah.
And just this. And then, and that's what, Doug Frost and Paul Bacalt have been instrumental in helping me understand those things.
They're so good. One of the biggest things that I took away from, I did the Quartermaster Sommeliers level 1, and, the certification's cool and leading up to it's fine. Once you get there, all the information. That's not what was awesome. It was the masters of, these master sommeliers up there. We had 3 at the time, and one of them broke down how he cataloged flavor, and it was amazing. It was groundbreaking for me. He said, I started taking, I would leave a peach out on the counter and wait for it to get, broken down and rotten, and then I would smell it, but I wouldn't just smell it and leave it. I would, in my mind, and this is, not everyone's going to do it this way, but I give you an example, and however you can go about building your flavor memory, do it. And if it works for you, but he would envision a field or whatever he envisioned with a huge white billboard in the middle of this field. And when he smelled it, whatever picture popped into his mind went onto the billboard. He said, I would do this over and over with that and just remember it. And then he said what eventually happened is he built up this catalog of billboards that he would smell a wine and all these pictures would start popping into his head. And it was amazing. And some people, I've heard people attribute it to having a filing cabinet where they picture them pulling out the different cards based on how they. So it's kind of interesting. It's such a cool topic to me.
It's like anything else. Like how do you? I mean, my degree's in psychology, and one of my favorite classes in getting that degree was perception. It was literally it was called perception. Everybody perceives things differently, and how you perceive flavor or aroma or color, it's all different. Now, yes, there are references for that, and we always say there's no wrong answer, but there are correct answers. Like,
Sure.
Marzipan tastes like marzipan, but
Right.
if you're tasting that something that there's no marzipan in, or no like almond paste in there, but you taste it, then you're not wrong there. But it's creating that library, and however you do that. If you're a flashcard person, then use flashcards. If I'm one of those guys that when I'm trying to memorize something, I write it out. Like, I've got notebooks where I'm either doing a presentation or prepping for an interview or something like that, and I'm literally writing answers out over and over and over until I got it.
Right.
But it's the same thing with spirits, and you're not going to know that until you put in a deliberate effort where you're not sitting at a bar, talking to hot chicks and smoking parliaments and doing whatever. But
Right.
it's like, if you want to get into this and really understand the nuances, and where these flavors come from and what those flavors are, then you got to put some work into it.
Yep.
But it's rad.
And don't, that's a big thing too. You hit on it earlier. Don't get discouraged. I find that so much in, staff trainings and whatnot. I'll be going over spirit and I'm like, well, these are the notes that are provided. It's just a guideline. Well, I didn't get any toffee in that. That's okay.
Sure.
You might eventually get it. You might never get that. That's fine. But build it up and know that common language.
Or do you even know what? And I'm saying I'm using toffee, but a lot of people know what toffee is. But do you even know what that? Do you know what
really know?
Do you know what caraway tastes like? Do you know what really what licorice root tastes like?
Right. Right.
And that's another thing that you can kind of go to Whole Foods or go to Sprouts and like buy some, buy like
individual spices
and stick your nose down in there.
It's so funny. When I was getting into wine study, my wife thought I was crazy, but I went on, I forget the website, but it was some huge spice. It was like Spice Mart or something. But I got, cardamom, black, green.
Cardamom is a big one. People say cardamom
all the time.
I don't know what the fuck cardamom.
Green, black. It's.
I remember the first time that I thought I knew what cardamom tastes like, and then
Yeah.
Chris Hopkins goes, "Well, it's black cardamom." I was like, "Are you fucking kidding me?"
Yeah.
That was a lot of F-bombs right there.
That's right. It's a lot of whiskey.
Earmuffs, ladies and
Gentlemen.
No,
but that helped me a lot. Was where I started, getting individual flavors and really paying attention to flavor. Where it's like, you take these staples and break them down, and then eventually those will come out. And if they don't, it's just like anything too. You have to keep up on it. So just drink more whiskey.
Well, or beer or wine
or anything,
or eat like
tea.
food. But tea, like teas. There are a lot of flavors in tea.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things too. Like, and I'm not saying like you and I don't post up to a bar with our notebook.
No.
I'm saying there's a time and a place.
Sure.
And I'm not saying nerd out on this stuff like every time you go to a bar, because I'll tell you what, the bartender is going to be like, what in the world are you doing?
Yeah.
But it is something that you should keep in mind that, and at the end of the day, I think it's rad. Like I love like kind of going down all these, look at all that. Like it's fun going through and like picking things out like that. I like that one, that whiskey, because it's got, this profile to it. I like that so tall because it's got a little something that reminds me of.
Yeah.
We won't get into that. But.
Right. No, but that's right. It's that, I forgot what you're talking about. Now I went down the Sotol rabbit hole.
Yeah,
I don't want to know him, but no, but yeah, there's definitely a time and place. You want to pick your spots, and also it's enjoyable, right? We're geeking out right now, but at the same time, like, all of this is leading up to a more enjoyable experience. And if it's your hobby, you can take it as far as you want, right? But we're just, I think it's good advice, because I've seen people get frustrated or discouraged in tastings. And I think it's okay just to say, well, I just got caramel. Cool. That's a good start. And if that's all you get and you still enjoy the whiskey, and if that's as far as you want to take your palate, perfect.
Well, and do you like caramel?
You're right.
Like, if that's not, if you don't like sweets, then you're probably not going to dig it.
Right.
Like if it's caramel and toffee forward, then that's not your bag. If you like spice, then you're, it's, listen, and all this being said, a little disclaimer. You're not going to find me and Cody at a bar like nerding out. Like,
No.
what do you get from this? No,
Nope.
we're gonna be chit chatting about the day and the
Exactly.
week and what's going on and
Right.
what's gonna happen next week and all that stuff. Like, it's just these are just tools that in your free time, if you choose to, you can
Yeah.
dive into this stuff.
Yeah, and there's hopefully there's people listening to you that are on, multiple levels where this is all old hat and, you've been practicing this for years. But I hope there's people that just getting into it, saying, well, I want to get more into it and it not to be overwhelming and, drink what you like, build up, try new things and don't be afraid to say, I don't like that or I don't understand that. And that's what it comes down to, man. It's
Don't be afraid to revisit things because
Sure.
You can have a one pass at something and then it not be all what you thought it was going to be, and then you taste it again, and then vice versa. I mean, I've had things where the first time I tasted it blew my socks off. I was like, that's incredible.
Yeah.
I tasted it again. I was like, oh, what happened? But it could be me. It could be,
Yeah.
who knows? What if I was walking through a casino that day where there was lots of smoke and
and like you said, perception, what were you feeling at the time? Were you at a, best friend's birthday party? Were you, with the wife or girlfriend or whatever on a date? It's your mood. And it all is perceiving how you're taking in that spirit. So, but yeah, revisit, drink what you like, get out there, drink more. But we have one more here, right?
One more. Yeah. This is 2017 birthday bourbon. So this is, in my opinion, a perfect example of, as a matter of fact, pour a little tiny into that glass. So we always hear this expression, oh, it's got to open up. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah.
But sometimes there are whiskeys, beers, and wines, or spirits, beers, and wines that require a certain amount of exposure to oxygen and other things. No, that's for you. But I want you to smell like what. So the first time I tasted this, poured it out of the glass. I'm super patient. I'm shaking my head no.
What?
And I just didn't. I was like, I don't get it.
Yeah.
I tasted it and I was like, But I let it sit in the glass for a little while. Mm-hmm. Oh my God. It's a really, really complex.
Yeah.
Really complex.
Extremely different from the previous year.
For sure. So in previous years, especially 2016 is a very dark brown sugar, sweet, that caramel toffee nougat profile with some fruits on the back end. This is just different.
Wow.
And what's cool about this, so this is kind of an anomaly for them. They released this in 2 different proofs. The majority of the cases released were bottled at 96 proof. Mm-hmm. There were some bottles that released at 95.4 proof. Those went to certain states. I think Florida got most of those. Mm-hmm. So that's been kind of an interesting thing to watch as far as the collectors go, because they want obviously both of them.
Sure.
I think it's great.
As if they weren't already hard to get. Now you're trying to get 2.
Oh, it's funny because you'll see people like, oh, I got mine in Florida. I'm like, oh, it's really? Yeah. I mean, you were talking about 0.6. And I asked, when I go visit Chris Morris, I'm basically asking him questions that people have asked me in my trainings that I couldn't answer. Because they do, Brown-Forman does an amazing job of setting you up for it's about as intensive education as I've ever seen before. But then you have this opportunity to go meet with, Chris Morris, Jeff Arnett, Chris Fletcher, and ask them questions. And those guys will tell you anything. They will literally tell you anything. And there is no secrets there. And a lot of times people ask me, they're like, why is Woodford Reserve bottled at 90.4? Because that's pretty
specific.
Yeah, it's super specific.
Yeah, sure.
And I asked them that, and I said, and they're actually, so before we had, I think Rye at some point was bottled at 92.4. But anyways, all Woodford Reserve marks will be bottled at 90.4. And I said, why 90.4? And he said, well, in the bottling process, there is a chance that through evaporation, before we cap it, that we will lose a little bit of alcohol due to evaporation.
Okay.
So when we bottle at 90.4, we are guaranteeing that it will never go below 90 proof. He wants things to always be enjoyed at 90 proof.
I got you.
And that made sense. So
Okay.
I think that the bottling error or the packaging area, and this is completely, again, this is not Mike, this is Cody talking.
Right.
But accents, he does an incredible Mike Doyle impression, but my
There's actually one person in the whole podcast. I don't know if you know.
I doubt that. But I just think that, listen, some fluctuations happen, but at the end of the day, they wanted you to enjoy this at 95, 96 proof. And so we're right there. If you're trying to nitpick, I don't know anybody who's got a hydrometer that's dropping that in there to make sure that they're
right.
getting the right proof. What do you think?
It's amazing. It's the variety, like, or the difference year to year is absolutely.
Ooh, that's so good.
Yeah. That might be my favorite of the three that we have. It's I pulled up the official stats where there's 120 total barrels.
Yep.
93 matured together on the fourth floor G warehouse. So they're saying it's a spice forward expression, and the remaining 27 on the fifth floor of K, which was the rounding sweetness in it. And then they said this expression highlights a bourbon that benefits from aging along the wall where it's getting direct sunlight.
Yep.
So that's a pretty cool thing to.
And that's what when you're dealing with a rick house. And listen, we talk a lot about like Booker's. They talk about the center cut. That's a big thing with Booker's. Is it's the center cut of the warehouse. It's the hottest part of the warehouse. And that's a traditional stick-built warehouse with no kind of differences between. There's no like concrete floor in between. When you're dealing with a heat-cycled warehouse, like we are at Old Forester and Woodford, then you have to find out where are those hottest temperatures. There are temperature fluctuations, but it's not necessarily like the top floor is hotter than the bottom floor. It's where in that warehouse. And these warehouses are huge. Like they're, you've got a whole wall that's exposed to more heat in the summertime. You're going to get more barrel expression or oak expression out of that.
Sure. Oh, so good. If you can
when
find
it hits
one.
your lips.
Right.
Yeah, if you can find one.
Yeah, definitely grab it. I was just thinking about Woodford Reserve.
I will tell you that MGM is a huge. If you're local here in Vegas, MGM is a huge supporter of Old Forester. They have Old Forester in the well.
Really?
They have Old Forester in the pump room, so they're pumping it. If you go in and order a bourbon and Coke, you're getting Old Forester 86. So
that's awesome, man.
It's amazing. As a result of that, they are the beneficiary of a lot of Old Forester birthday allocation. Okay. And so I really hope I don't get fired for saying this, but or saying that. But if you go into MGM steakhouses, I know for a fact I went to Bavette's at Monte Carlo, which is an incredible steakhouse that just opened up. And they have 2016, and they'll get 2017 as soon as it clears their warehouse. But they have 2016 birthday bourbon on the menu, I think, for $16.
Nice.
Like that's, so if you want to your point earlier, if you want to go in and you can't find the bottle, you can definitely find those highly allocated bottles at a bar that's not going to rip your face off on the price. So, so go find it. It's here in town. It's incredible. And if you ever find if you ever have an opportunity to buy that, do it.
Take it. Anything else coming up with the line, whether it be Old Forester or anything Brown-Forman that you want to kind of?
You have no idea.
Yeah.
It is. Chris Morris and actually Jeff Arnett. So Chris Morris is the master distiller, obviously, for Woodford Reserve and Old Forester. So Brown-Forman, essentially, because he also does Early Times and Cooper's Craft. They have a lot of new stuff coming online. Same with Jeff Arnett. So, they listen a lot to the consumers and to the bartenders on what they're looking for. So I can't really speak to that. Maybe if we went 3 more birthday bourbons, I could probably tell you. But they got a lot of really, really, really cool stuff coming out. So, cool. The Woodford Reserve Masters Collection is always kind of Chris's, his projects.
Yeah.
at the end of the day, a distiller's job is to make sure that that product is the exact same today as it was 3 years ago. And obviously they're Blanton's isn't going to be the same, or
Right.
E.H. Taylor's, single barrel. Those are going to be different. But for the most part, their job is to create a consistent product.
Yep.
But those guys, they don't go to work. They don't wake up every day to do that. They have this creative bone inside of them.
Sure.
They want to express themselves. And so there's a lot of innovation coming online. There's a lot of stuff coming online with different mash bills.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to get
Cool. What?
like I would say in the next 24 months,
Nice.
we have some like really, really fun stuff coming online.
Cool. Well, I'm excited, man. So, and what are some trends you think? I mean, it's always fun because I hope that I can come back to these podcasts and see, like, I hate people that try to predict things.
Sure.
But as far as whiskey trends, I mean, where do you think you see it going?
Mash bills. There's
Sure.
going to be people manipulating mash bills. Obviously, we have to stay inside a certain parameter to call it bourbon. But we're also seeing the consumer doesn't care if you call it bourbon.
Sure.
We were talking about
Whiskey.
the Parker's Heritage, malt whiskey. That's not a bourbon.
Yeah.
It's fucking incredible.
I think single or American single malts are going to take
American
off.
single malts.
Yeah.
I've been a fan, quite frankly, of Stranahan's for a long time. It's
Yeah.
so different. It's
Yep.
so different. When you're used to drinking a bourbon or a rye or a Tennessee whiskey, and then you taste something like Stranahan's or that Parker's Heritage malt whiskey, it's so different. Rye whiskeys obviously are going to be, they're growing exponentially. Jack Daniel's just released their straight Tennessee whiskey, which is incredible. The mash bill on it is very unique. It's 70% rye, 18% corn, and 12% malted barley. Not a lot, and it sees 6 days of fermentation, the same fermentation process that Old Number 7 goes through.
Yeah.
It's incredible. It's super complex. You've got a lot of fruit. When you stick your nose down in that, you get banana, passion fruit, pineapple, those soft tropical fruits.
Yeah.
Then you get balanced out with spice. So rye whiskeys, I think, are going to be there. They're going to be, but you're going to start seeing a lot of whiskey producers doing their own rye whiskey.
Sure.
And then,
But do you think by the time that reaches maturity, because everyone tried to ramp up, right? And it's awesome to see the diversity in the rye whiskeys now and them starting to hit the market. But whiskey industry is insane because it's by the time, people are asking for single malts or whatever the next thing is, now we're going to have this excess of rye, which is going to be awesome.
I think it'll be awesome.
But it's just such a hard industry to predict
Sure.
trends, and that's what keeps these guys up at night. It's like, where should I allocate my time?
So I think that, the barrel finishing has been obviously super interesting to watch. Angel's Envy was, one of the first American whiskeys to,
Yep.
I mean, that's they only have 2 SKUs.
To stretch what a bourbon is.
To stretch what a bourbon is,
Yeah.
and to impart different flavors from literally a different part of the world, either the Caribbean or, the Angel's Envy, their bourbon gets finished in plantation. I don't know if you know that, but plantation rum cask. And plantation's probably at the leading edge of rum production and finishing. And then their rye obviously is finished in port casks. Whistle Pig, they've got their New World rye whiskey, which is so different from their 10-year or their 15-year. It's like a completely different. If you imagine it's the same juice in there, but it's so wildly different from anything else.
Drastic, yeah.
We're starting to see a lot of experimentation with, which I think is rad. It's super nerdy and it's a very granular level, but the Woodford Reserve Double Oaked was a experimentation with toasted barrels. Toast is really where you get, when you toast a barrel for 45 minutes, you get a lot of flavors that come out of that.
See, that's where I always attribute it to cognac, where they're not charring barrels, they're toasting for that flavor. So, but Double Oak for me was a game changer as far as what whiskey could do. And when I learned the process, I'm like, oh man, I get it. And that's still one of my favorite expressions of whiskey.
And honestly, if you're trying to learn about whiskey, it's a great exercise in knowing and understanding the aging process. Michter's has they released their toasted, barrel finish, cask strength.
I know that
grain.
Basil Hayden's doing their dark rye, which is a port. So the big dogs are. I'm not saying it's like the best thing but you're seeing the big guys playing with it because everyone is.
Well, I'm going to be interested to see how that kind of plays out
Sure.
because that actually isn't a port finish. It actually has port wine in it.
I know.
So
yeah, it's
a California port at that. So which is interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know Portugal was in Cali.
But to my point is that, whether they're doing it in what we think is the preferred way, they're still trying to mess with it because they see that that's a trend. Like people are coming and saying, "Oh, do you have anything with different barrel finishes?" Like that wasn't a thing 5-6 years ago. People weren't asking for barrel finished whiskey.
And I'll tell you what, are you familiar with the Maker's Mark new like barrel selection process and how they do that?
How you can go in and pick your own,
bro.
I mean, it's down to Hungarian oak and
chocolate staves and mocha staves,
killer.
and it is
awesome.
like it is bonkers.
Yeah, you're ordering it's a recipe.
It is a recipe.
Yeah.
And how they've managed to do that, I remember. So when Greg Davis was in town, he was in town I think it was probably like this time last year, and we were just about to launch that program, and we went and had dinner. And he was going through this, and I mean, dude, my jaw was on the ground. I was like, first of all, who came up with this? Like, who thought of this? Because it's groundbreaking.
Sure.
And then now that we're a year removed from that, I've actually tasted some of these. So MGMRI went in and did for, like, Aria has their own barrel, Bellagio has their own barrel, MGM Grand has their own barrel, and I tasted those, and they're all like wildly different. And then I remember, like, and there's a lot of competitiveness in between those because those operators they crush it. They do an amazing job. They're very thoughtful in how they want to structure their program. It is not just plug and play. They know they have their thumb on the pulse of their clients there.
Right.
And there's a competitiveness there, like when they taste it, and they're all so different. And it was really cool to see the differences. We had a really cool bourbon training for all MGM properties back at the end of October, and Maker's Mark came in, and they actually walked the entire like operations team from all their other properties, all the properties in Vegas, through that process.
Wow.
It was pretty, and then we got to taste the final product.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So barrel finishing, and grain manipulation.
Sure.
And then, who knows? Like the new Masters collection is a cherry wood smoked barley malt for Woodford Reserve.
That's just going for it.
It's
like,
going
that's
for it.
So far out of the box, which is what I was saying. It's like you're not afraid to push the boundaries because you don't know what's going to be that.
No, it's a whiskey made in Kentucky with no rye, and 70% like smoked malt.
Yeah. And
10% of brewer's malt, and then the balance of that is corn. Like, I know that's 20, by the way, for you mathletes, but that I've never even heard of a smoked kiln or a smoked malt before in American whiskey. Mm-hmm. And it's subtle, it's a very, like, I tell people it's more like campfire than it is like, peat, because it's not, you're not using there's no maritime influence. When you say malted or smoked barley, a lot of times people think of an Islay Scotch. Well, there's a maritime influence with that, which
it has the medicinal.
It's decomposed, like seaweed. So, listen, there's a lot of really, really cool stuff. One, I think that at the end of the day, you're going to find we're moving in higher proofs. Yeah. I think if you produce something and it's over $20 at 80 proof, you're not going to sell it.
Yeah.
You need to produce it. You gotta ramp up the ABV on that.
Yeah.
Cask strength. That changes so much.
Absolutely. But you're also seeing the general public paying more for whiskey than they used to, which is awesome because now you're allowing these companies to put out, whether it be cask strength or different finishes or different mash bills that may be more expensive to produce. So
we're seeing. I mean, so bourbon for a long time was a very economical choice for people, right? Mm-hmm. 20, 30, $40. That was it. That's
cheap grain.
Yeah. And then you didn't really get into Scotch until you kind of had, you had a good gig or it was expensive, but people are paying Scotch prices for bourbons now. That those, it wasn't made on the moon. It's still the kind of a very similar production process as all other bourbons, but you're seeing people pay crazy money, like Scotch money.
Yep.
Yeah, I call it Scotch money. You know, that's because before, you know, you get a Scotch that's $200. Come on. Like,
Yeah.
did Smurfs make that? Like, what's,
Right.
but it's exciting.
Yeah, man, it's awesome. This lineup was definitely a treat to like. It's very rare that you get to sit down with a whole lineup, especially like 3 birthday bourbons. That was cool, but really tasting these and the main point of all being the same mash bill and then seeing such differences in the expression. So it was awesome for me. Anything you want to leave the listeners with? Some advice?
I mean, at the end of the day, I always tell people, I'm like, drink something. I've said this for a long time, whether it be a cocktail, whether it be whiskey, whether it be gin, drink something interesting. You've got, I like the fact that people don't drink now just as they're not drinking alcohol as a vehicle for ethyl alcohol or ethanol. They're drinking because they want to have this experience. There's a ton of stories. There's a ton of history. There's a ton of like love that goes into all these. Research it, sink your teeth into it, and then when you go out to a bar and you order something rad, that you're gonna make a friend with that bartender. Yeah, the bartender's gonna be like, "Yeah, that cat knows what's up."
Yeah, for sure. Life's short. Drink good whiskey.
Yep.
So awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Cody.
Yeah, man. Thank you, Mike Doyle again. Definitely check out the line if you can. Get your hands on some of the stuff you may not have tried before. So thank you for taking the time, and cheers, everybody. Thank you. Thank you all so much for joining us for the Whiskey Talkin' podcast. If you dig the show, please share it with your friends and family that might also enjoy it. Follow the show on Facebook, Whiskey Talkin' Podcast, also on Instagram and Twitter under the name Whiskey Talkin' PC. The website's whiskeytalk.in. Feel free to contact me with thoughts, show ideas, whiskey suggestions, or anything your whiskey heart desires. Thank you again, and remember,
if it got out of hand, it was the whiskey talking.